We just dealt with theme number one, which is God creates by speaking into the chaos. And we talked about this idea of tahu vabahu, the chaos, the formlessness and the void, that God comes and speaks into the chaos and creates beauty, order, and relationship. And this eventually goes from the heavens and the earth into the more advanced creatures, and eventually ends with the pinnacle of the man, Adam, and the woman, Eve. Now we move on to theme number two, and if theme one is deeply based in Genesis 1 and 2, then theme 2 is based in Genesis chapter 3. And in fact, what I want you to see now is we're talking about themes. And you'll notice that this whole class is structured around 12 themes. And remember that 6 of those themes are from the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. 6 of those are from the New Testament. In fact, right now we're actually taping this in Kiryat Gat here in Israel, and we're on our annual dig at Tel Atzeka with Tel Aviv University and Heidelberg University. Each year we take students and staff and faculty here to Israel because we think it's very important to come back to a word that I talked about with theme number one, and that is contextualization. I want my students to come over here and actually get their hands in the dirt. We do a dig for 2 weeks, and they learn about the early bronze and the late bronze and the Iron Age, which is the biblical period, the Persian, so forth. They learn so much about this, and basically the reason why I want them coming over here is because they can contextualize what they believe. Remember, I talked about this idea that Jesus, we need to go back and contextualize him within his time here in Israel. So anyway, when we talk about these themes, we've got 6 themes from the Hebrew Bible and 6 themes from the New Testament. And when I use the word themes, just think of it this way. These are big ideas. So as we continue on thinking through what is a Christian worldview, and of course your final paper is going to be answering the question, a 5 to 7 page paper trying to answer the question, what is a Christian worldview? It may be your worldview, it may not. We really honestly don't care. We just want you to grapple with the history and the meaning of Judeo-Christianity. So you're going to write a paper, what is a Christian worldview? And one of the things that I encourage you to do is in some ways model what I'm doing. I've gone in and I'm looking for themes, another word for big ideas. And so what are the big ideas as you try to answer the question, what is a Christian worldview? What are the big ideas that are essential? And that's what I'm trying to do with you here in this course, and eventually I hope you'll walk away with not necessarily my big ideas, my themes, but themes that you think are important to understanding Christianity. Again, whether you come from a Christian worldview or not. All right, so the first theme, God creates by speaking into the chaos. Second theme is faith is seizing your destiny. And I'm going to find this theme, if I'm correct, and I've spent a lot of years studying this, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm correct. But I'm going to locate this theme. I'm going to find this theme in Genesis 3. But I want you to see this. These themes, these big ideas occur throughout the Hebrew Bible and even into the New Testament. And to me, this is one of the most beautiful things about the Christian scriptures is you see some of the same themes, some of the same human concern over a stretch literally of thousands of years, hundreds of years. And you see the same themes that are very important to the Jews, the Israelites, and they become important to the early Christian church. And this is one of those themes that we see repeated in the scriptures and we see repeated in Jewish and Christian theology. Faith is seizing your destiny. And this is a little bit different than in the New Testament. Because in the New Testament, faith is more of a conviction, it's more of a belief, it's more of a mental idea. And when we talk about faith in the Old Testament, it is more of an action. So just to give you a little bit of a comparison contrast here, Faith in the New Testament is an idea or an ideal that someone believes, and then faith in the Old Testament is an action. And the word that I'm using here is really quite strong and quite graphic. Faith is seizing your destiny. And so when we come to the Old Testament, faith is very important. And it is radical in its stepping out. That's why Abraham is a prime example of this. God shows up. He's in lower Mesopotamia, and God says, okay, Abraham, I want you to go to a land that I'm going to show you. And it's really powerful because in Genesis, it says that God showed up after Abraham got there. And so Abraham, all the way into Romans and Galatians for the Apostle Paul, Abraham is the prime example of, if you will, a crazy faith, a radical faith that even goes before God. A lot of times, I know Christians at times will look for signs, and they want to make sure that this is going to happen before they step out. But in the Old Testament, in Judaism, faith is a radical stepping out. And in many ways, it's claiming and seizing your destiny. Now, this is very important too, because in the Hebrew Bible, many times, the destiny is your passion. Augustine said, love God and do what you want. And that gets close to what we're talking about when we talk about faith in the Old Testament. It's stretching out, it's seizing, it's basically going before God. Now, I told you that this is grounded in Genesis chapter 3. And this is where it gets a little controversial. Because it tells us in Genesis chapter 3 that the man and the woman are in the Garden of Eden. And then there is a serpent in the Garden of Eden. And the serpent speaks to the woman and basically says to take the fruit of the tree, which is the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the serpent begins to explain to Eve that basically if you'll take this fruit, then you will be like God, your eyes will be open, you will know the difference between good and evil. Now, it's very important to listen to your theology when you read this text and the difference between your theology and the text itself. Because when you read this text very carefully, and I encourage you to go back to Genesis 3, 1-7, the serpent really never lies. The serpent basically says, look, if you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, your eyes will be open. In other words, you will know the difference between good and evil. The concept here is going from innocence into adolescence, if you will. Your eyes are open, you are conscious now, and you have the potential of becoming a full human being. And so really, this story in Genesis 3, verses 1-7, is a story of growing up. It's a story of moving from innocence and ignorance into consciousness. And however, in this case, was it wrong? Absolutely. Did they disobey God? Yes. But I want you to see that this opens up an idea that becomes very important to Judaism and Christianity, and that is, yes, they disobeyed God. Were there consequences? Oh my goodness, we're still living with the consequences today. But they became more human, and they became more conscious, and they became more responsible, and no longer would they live as creatures of God with this idea of kind of living like a 5-year-old without worldly knowledge. Now they will know the difference between good and evil. However, in that disobedience, they will be punished, and this will open the door for redemption. And so I want to give you a phrase, a saying that I think is very important for this class, for Judaism in the Old Testament and for the New Testament. And that is this: God is not in the business of perfection. I think really if God were in the business of perfection, we would see Genesis 1-2 throughout the whole Bible. We have 2 chapters that are quote unquote perfect, Genesis 1 and 2, and then the last 2 chapters in Revelation, 21 and 22. And so the humans must leave the Garden of Eden. They must grow up. Their eyes must become open. And in doing so, they will become redeemed. And so God is not in the business of perfection. God is in the business of redemption. And that's very important to understand as we begin here and then move on.